I remember walking through the hollowed-out corridors of Hollow Oaks Galleria that first night as if I'd stepped into a dream I couldn't quite wake from. The air was thick with silence, an oppressive, almost tangible quiet that wrapped around me like a shroud. I'd taken the job with a mixture of curiosity and a flicker of unease, knowing that the mall had been abandoned for years, yet somehow that silence felt heavy, almost alive. The place was exactly how I'd imagined. Dust motes danced lazily in the faint glow of my flashlight. The once vibrant storefronts now stood as silent skeletons, their glass fronts streaked with grime and age. The noise of footsteps, chatter, or even the faint hum of a busy mall seemed distant, almost non-existent. It was as if the entire space had been drained of life, leaving only the husk of what once was. As I moved deeper into the emptiness, my footsteps echoed softly on the cracked tiles, a gentle reminder of how alone I truly was. I kept my eyes peeled, but there was nothing. No flicker of movement, no distant sounds, just this unnerving stillness. The silence was thick, almost oppressive, as if the mall itself was holding its breath. I paused in the center of the main corridor, noting the mannequins that lined the empty storefronts. Their formality was unsettling. Frozen in time, dressed in faded clothes, their features worn and blank. I'd seen mannequins before, but these felt different. There was a subtle shift in their posture, a slight tilt of the head that I was sure I hadn't noticed before. When I blinked, they were perfectly still again. I told myself it was just the way shadows played tricks, that my tired eyes were deceiving me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of something out of place. A mannequin's head turned just a fraction, or a limb that seemed to have moved when I wasn't looking. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild, compounded by the long hours and the unfamiliar silence. But deep down, I knew something was off. The air was cool and still, the kind of coolness that seeped into your bones, making you shiver despite the thick layers of clothing I'd worn. I found a seat near the old information kiosk and sat quietly, letting the silence settle over me. It was comforting in a strange way, like the mall was a sanctuary of stillness, a place untouched by time or human presence. But beneath that calm, I sensed something lurking, something just beyond the edge of perception. At one point, I caught myself staring at a row of mannequins in a clothing store. Their eyes, painted and glassy, seemed to follow my movements. I wondered if it was just my mind playing tricks, or if they had some kind of life I couldn't see. I told myself to stay focused, to keep calm. Still, I couldn't help feeling that the mall's silence was a kind of barrier, protecting something, or perhaps hiding it. The hours stretched on, and I found myself slipping into a strange rhythm, half awake, half in a dream. Every sound was muffled, as if the world outside had been erased. I'd glance at the mannequins, expecting them to be frozen in their usual poses, but sometimes I'd notice a subtle change, a tilt of the head, a shift in stance. Nothing overt, nothing dramatic, just enough to make me question what I thought I knew about this place. I kept my radio off, not wanting to disturb the quiet, and instead focused on the faint creak of the building settling, the distant drip of water echoing somewhere in the darkness. It was disorienting, almost hypnotic. I felt like I was slipping further into that silence, like I was becoming part of it, a ghost wandering through a place that refused to wake. And then, just as I was about to convince myself that the silence was nothing more than an eerie lull, I noticed something strange. A flicker of movement, hardly noticeable, just a shadow crossing a doorway at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look, it was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a fleeting illusion, but the feeling persisted that I wasn't alone. That's how it began, I suppose. The slow, creeping realization that beneath the mall's quiet exterior, Something was watching, waiting. Something that thrived in the stillness, in the spaces between moments. I had come here expecting a boring night, a simple job, but the silence was just the beginning. And I knew, deep down, that I wouldn't be leaving this place unchanged. As the hours drifted by in the hollow silence of the mall, I started to notice things that didn't quite belong. It was subtle at first, a faint shuffle, almost like the whisper of a breeze, but there was no wind inside these empty corridors. Just the muffled sound of my own breathing, the slow echo of my footsteps, and somewhere in the distance, a soft, irregular tapping. I paused, listening. Silence returned, thick and heavy, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Then, from somewhere deeper within the shadows, I thought I heard footsteps, small, tentative, echoing lightly on the tiled floor. I looked around, but the corridor was empty. It was probably just my imagination, I told myself, the mind playing tricks in the dark. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The flickering glow of the CRT TVs was another strange thing. Every now and then, I'd pass a display, and the screen would burst into life with static, and then distorted commercials, looping endlessly. The images were warped, the voices garbled, like a tape rewinding and playing back at the same time. Watching them, I wondered if the footage was repeating itself, or if I was simply losing my grip on reality. I'd stare at the flickering screens, feeling a strange pull, a whisper in my mind telling me to stay a little longer, to see what came next.
Mannequins had always unsettled me, but now they seemed to take on a life of their own. I'd catch glimpses of them clustered in the shadows, their glass eyes reflecting the faint light. Sometimes they'd be posed in casual stances, arms crossed, heads tilted, yet there was always something wrong. A mannequin with its arm turned at an uncanny angle, or one that seemed to be staring directly at me, even when I was sure I had looked away. When I approached, they'd be perfectly still, yet I'd feel a prickling at the back of my neck, like the sensation of being watched. And then there were the shadows, not the usual darkness of a vacant mall, but darker, thicker, almost alive. They moved at the edges of my vision, curling and stretching across the walls, slipping into corners I knew were empty. Sometimes I'd see them flicker, like a shadow cast by something unseen, slipping just beneath the surface of my sight. I'd stop, heart pounding softly, trying to convince myself it was just the poor lighting or my tired eyes, but a part of me knew better. Shadows don't behave like that. Not here, not in this silence. It was as if the mall itself was whispering secrets just beyond the edge of my understanding. I could feel it, an invisible presence, a watcher lurking in the periphery, teasing my senses, blurring the line between what was real and what was hallucination. My mind was beginning to feel fragile, fraying at the edges like an old film reel that's seen too many rewinds. Each flicker, each distant sound seemed to pull me further into a waking nightmare. I tried to speak, to call out or even whisper to myself, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I let the sounds wash over me, soft, persistent, insidious. The faint whispers of voices I couldn't understand, the muffled footsteps, the flickering images. They all conspired to make the silence seem oppressive, suffocating, as if the mall's very walls were alive with something unseen. And then, just as I thought I might crack, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a fleeting movement, like a shadow slipping past. I turned, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Only the empty corridor, the flickering glow, and the silent mannequins, standing motionless once again. I knew then that whatever this place was, it wasn't just abandoned. It had become something else, something that thrived in the quiet, in the subtle shadows and whispers. It toyed with my senses, pulling me deeper into its labyrinth of illusions. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady myself. When I opened them, the darkness pressed in closer, and the faint hum of static filled my ears once more. Somewhere, in the quiet, I could still hear the faint echoes of footsteps, soft, deliberate, and I wondered if I was truly alone, or if something was waiting, just beyond the reach of my senses.
The silence was no longer comforting. It was alive, and it was watching. The rewinding night. I remember the rush of frustration that had been building inside me, simmering beneath the surface as I darted toward the surveillance room. The flickering lights of the security monitors cast long, wavering shadows across the narrow corridor. My footsteps echoed softly, almost too softly, as if the entire mall was holding its breath, waiting to see if I'd find what I was looking for. When I finally pushed open the door to the surveillance office, the stale, musty smell hit me. The scent of dust, neglect, and something else I couldn't quite place. The screens flickered faintly, showing the empty corridors in muted black and white. I approached the monitor bank, my eyes darting across the static feed. I needed answers, and I needed them now. That's when I saw it. In the grainy, flickering footage, my own face appeared, sleepwalking through the mall, eyes half-lidded, movements slow and deliberate. The video played on, rewinding itself in a loop, showing me moving in a strange, methodical pattern. I watched in disbelief as I seemed to be arranging mannequins, picking them up, positioning their limbs, setting them in eerie displays that looked almost intentional. The footage flickered again, rewinding further, revealing that I'd been doing this for hours I had no memory of. I saw myself, eyes unfocused, hands moving almost by instinct, as if possessed. The mannequins, once lifeless forms, now appeared to be part of a twisted choreography, frozen in unnatural poses, their blank faces staring back at the camera like silent witnesses. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I had no recollection of any of it, no memory of wandering through the mall, let alone meticulously arranging those figures. Yet here was proof, frozen in time, that I'd been here, caught in some waking nightmare. The loop kept repeating, each cycle more disturbing than the last, like a tape rewinding itself with a sick, relentless rhythm. I stared at the screens, my mind racing to piece together what I was seeing. Was I sleepwalking? Or was something else, something darker, controlling me? The idea was terrifying. The notion that I was somehow not entirely myself, that my own mind was unraveling, made my stomach turn. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with a sense of unseen presence. It felt as if the mall itself was alive, watching, waiting. My reflection flickered in the monitor glass, and for a moment, I thought I saw something behind me, an outline, a shadow, just beyond the flickering edge of vision. I spun around, but nothing was there. Only the hollow silence, punctuated by my own shallow breathing. I reached out instinctively and pressed the rewind button, hoping to stop the footage, to somehow freeze this waking nightmare. But the screen responded sluggishly, as if resisting my attempt. The image on the monitor shifted, rewinding even further, revealing more of the night I had no memory of. The footage stretched back into the darkness, into the unknown. What haunted me most was the realization that I had been doing this, these disturbing acts, without knowing it. Something had taken control, forcing my body into movements I couldn't understand, into actions that now seemed almost preordained. I felt a creeping dread, the kind that seeps into your bones, whispering that I was losing myself, slipping further into a nightmare I might never wake from. I sat there, staring at the looping footage, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down on me.
The mall's ghostly quiet had turned into a symphony of whispers and unseen movements, all woven into that endless, rewinding night. And in that moment, I knew the real horror wasn't just what I saw on the screens. It was what I couldn't see, what I could never fully understand. Because some things, I realized, are best left in the dark, buried beneath the hollow oaks of the night's quiet forest. It's strange how the mind clings to memories, especially those buried deep, hidden beneath layers of fear and denial. As I sat there, staring at the flickering glow of the abandoned surveillance monitors, I started to see the patterns, threads woven into the fabric of Hollow Oak's history. It was like peeling back a fragile, decaying layer to reveal something darker underneath. The more I looked, the clearer it became. This mall had a tragic past, a story stained with loss. Over the years, there had been disappearances, people who simply vanished without explanation, their names whispered in hushed tones by local townsfolk. I remembered reading old news reports, half-forgotten articles that spoke of missing persons, of frantic searches that turned up nothing. The stories were too vague, too wrapped in myth to piece together fully, but they left a bitter taste, like a warning I had ignored. And then, as I delved deeper into the history of Hollow Oaks, it struck me. What if the figures I'd been seeing weren't ghosts, not in the traditional sense? Maybe they were manifestations, echoes left behind by the collective trauma of those lost, distorted by something dark and unseen. Something that fed on the fears and fractured minds of anyone who entered its domain. I remembered the mannequins, how they'd moved when I wasn't looking, shifted into new poses, sometimes appearing to stare at me with vacant, unblinking eyes. It was as if they were trying to tell me something I couldn't quite grasp. But I realized now that they weren't just inanimate objects, not anymore. They were symbols, remnants of lives interrupted, frozen in time, manipulated by an unseen force.
And what was I? Was I just another piece in this twisted game? Or had I always been part of it, from the moment I stepped into Hollow Oaks? The thought chilled me more than I cared to admit. Every flicker, every whisper, every shifting shadow. It all felt like fragments of a fractured mind converging into a terrifying, inescapable nightmare. The realization sank in slowly, like a weight pressing down on my chest. The mall's darkness was no longer just physical. It had seeped into my thoughts, into my memories, distorting everything I believed to be real. I could feel my grip on sanity loosening, slipping away like sand through my fingers. Then, a faint voice, almost a whisper, slid into my consciousness. Not quite words, but enough to send a shiver down my spine. It sounded familiar, yet alien, like a distant echo of my own voice, calling from a place I couldn't reach. I wondered if it was my mind playing tricks, or if the mall's dark energy was somehow toying with me, rewriting my memories, making me doubt my very self. I looked around, searching for something, anything, that could explain all of this. And in the quiet gloom, I saw it. An old, tattered photograph pinned beneath a flickering light. It was a picture of the mall, taken decades ago. People strolled through its halls, unaware of the darkness that lurked beneath their footsteps. But what caught my eye was a figure in the corner, a shadowy silhouette standing just beyond the frame, watching. It was then that I understood. The past wasn't just history. It was alive, pulsing beneath the surface, feeding on fear and despair. And I was caught in its web, a puppet dancing to a tune I couldn't hear, but knew all too well.
My own fractured mind was being manipulated, twisted into a reflection of the mall's haunted soul. As I sat there trembling, I realized that the line between reality and nightmare had dissolved entirely. The echoes of the past weren't gone. They were here, manifesting in every shadow, every whisper, every flicker of light. Hollow Oaks wasn't just a place. It was a reflection of something darker within us all, something that thrived in silence and darkness. And I knew, in the quiet depths of my mind, that I might never escape, that I was forever trapped in this cycle of dread and paranoia, endlessly reliving the echoes of the past. The only question was, would I ever find a way out? Or would I become just another ghost haunting the hollow halls?